Hey, it's Katie, and welcome back to my booktube channel. Today I will be doing my February wrap-up, so I'll be telling you guys all the books that I read and my thoughts on them. And this month I somehow read 17 books, which is crazy to me. I read like a little over 6,000 pages, which is a lot, but as you could probably tell, that's basically all I did this month. I was reading tons of really fun romance books. I had a couple fantasies, but it was pretty much all romance because of Valentine's Day. So yeah, I had like 3 or 4 5-star reads this month. So I feel like that's a pretty good reading month for me. And at the end, I'll tell you some of my favorites, but let's just jump into it. The first book I read this month was The Honey Don't List by Christina Lauren. And this follows Carrie, who has worked for the Tripps since she was 16 years old. And the Tripps are a couple who does some like home remodeling, kind of like you'd see on HGTV, kind of similar to Chip and Joanna Gaines from Fixer Upper, except they're kind of really toxic in this book. But basically, this couple is like held up in society as like this really lovey-dovey great couple, but behind the scenes they really don't get along and they don't like each other. And so they are going on this book tour, and our main character Carrie along with another assistant James are forced to go with them to make sure they don't start screaming at each other in public and blow their cover basically. And so, as you can imagine, lots of things go wrong, and Carrie and James are put through a lot for their jobs, but they end up finding love in the process. I really enjoyed this one. I'm glad I started off my reading month with this. I think it was great, and the romance is really cute. I think that Carrie and James had a ton of chemistry, and it was very interesting to have such an angry, toxic backdrop with the Tripps versus Carrie and James in the forefront, which was a very sweet romance that was starting to bloom. So that was a very interesting like dichotomy. I don't know where I pulled that word from, but hopefully I used it in the right context. But that was very interesting, and it was also kind of frustrating to see the Tripps relationship because it was so toxic. That was definitely a lot to kind of deal with because they said and did some pretty crappy things throughout this, but it all kind of ended in a good way, I think. So it's definitely worth the read. And Christina Lauren, they're great authors. I have enjoyed every book I've read from them so far. The next book I read was an ARC that I got from NetGalley, and that was Love in Lockdown by Alice Caswell, and it comes out March 4th. This book takes place during a pandemic, and our main character, Angela, did all she could to avoid her neighbor, Colin, until she got evicted and he offered her his spare room for free. And so they move in together, and it seems like a really sweet thing for Colin to do, except the only reason he did it was because he needs a good deed to talk about on his radio show. And his listeners love hearing about his encounters with Angela, so in order to satisfy them, he creates this serialized romance between the two of them. And Angela is the perfect writing partner for him because she loves romance novels and she's hoping to write her own one day. So they work together to try to create this serial romance basically, and they try to figure out where the line is between what is real and what they are creating. I wasn't really sure how I'd feel about this one going in because it is taking place during a pandemic, which we are still going through, so I wasn't sure if it would feel nice and relatable or if it would be kind of traumatizing, but I'm very happy to say that it felt very relatable, very refreshing. I loved being able to connect with the characters on the same level because they're going through things that we are still going through today. So that was very nice. It's also crazy to think that we've been going through this for long enough that there's a book about it, but I did enjoy that aspect. And I thought Angela and Colin were pretty adorable. I was really rooting for them. I just didn't really see a lot of chemistry between them, which is usually my favorite part in romances. So I kind of gave it 3 stars, like an average rating, because I didn't connect too much to the romance, but I enjoyed the characters and I enjoyed the fact that it took place during a pandemic because, like I said, it was very relatable. Then I read Simmer Down by Sarah Smith, and this was one of my favorite books that I read this month. I loved it so much. But this is an enemies to lovers food truck romance, which is so cool. And it follows Nikki, who kind of dropped her dream job to move to Maui and help her mom with a Filipino food truck. And she got to work one day to see that Callum took her spot with his new British food truck and was stealing her customers. And this basically created a public feud between them. And they decided that the only way to settle it was to do the Maui Food Festival. So whoever won the festival got to keep the spot, and the other person was just out of luck and had to leave. And I, like I said, enjoyed this one so much. There was so much chemistry between the two main characters. The banter was amazing. It honestly was a little steamier than I was expecting, but that was great too. And I loved seeing the different cultures and like the food and stuff that they did. I love those elements in books, and that's amazing. The cover is absolutely adorable. And I'm honestly kind of sad that I got this one from the library because I really want to own it so I can reread it. So that's definitely on my list of things to do. Also, there was a ton of raw emotion between the characters, and it was very surprising, but that was one of my favorite elements of this book, and I never wanted this book to end, so I highly recommend this to you guys. Up next, I finally got to start a series that I'm sure most of you have read, and that is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I feel like I'm so late to this series. Everybody's been saying amazing things about it, and I'm so glad that I finally picked it up this month. This follows Feyre, who has to go hunting to find food for her family, and one day while she's trying to kill a deer, she also kills a wolf. And all of a sudden, this terrifying creature shows up at her door demanding retribution for the wolf that she killed. And so she gets taken away to this magical land where she learns that her captor is actually an immortal fairy. And through her time there, she starts to learn more about her captor, and she starts to see this shadow and darkness spreading through the land. And in order to save her captor and the world, basically, she has to find a way to stop the darkness. I am so glad this book lived up to the hype because I was so nervous to start this series with all of the amazing things people were saying about it. But what pushed me to do it was the new book in the series that came out this month, which I haven't had a chance to get to yet. I'm only 2 books into this series, but this one was amazing. I actually have a full review of it on this channel. I will try to remember to link it somewhere, I don't know, but I loved it that much that I did a full review. So obviously it's very good, and I loved all the different creatures we got to meet in here. I would really love to have a grimoire handbook type thing where we get to see what each creature looks like and some facts about them. I feel like that would be a really fun companion novel to go with this series. I really loved diving into this complex world and meeting all these amazing characters, and I'm definitely Team Rhysand for sure. He just captured my attention from the second that we met him, and I just love him so much, and I really love him and Feyre together, even though there's only like a few instances in this book. I definitely am rooting for them. After that, I read another one of my favorites this month, which was Instant Karma by Marissa Meyer. I was so excited to pick this one up because I have read things by Marissa Meyer before and I really enjoyed them, and this is very different from the other books that she's written, so I was excited to see how this one would go, and I'm so glad that I picked it up. It follows Prudence, who is a chronic overachiever, and one day she wakes up with the ability to cast instant karma on those around her. And there's only one person that it backfires for, and that is her lab partner and basically her enemy, Quint. And they end up working at this sea animal rescue facility during the summer because she's trying to get some extra credit, and they kind of have to figure out how to work together while saving the animals, and it's just one of the most adorable books I think I've ever read. I love that in this book you learn all about saving animals and the environment, and I honestly learned some fun facts in here too, but that's definitely a prominent theme in this book, which was very nice to see. The characters were so fun to get to know, and you get to see a lot more of the animals than I was expecting, and that was definitely a fun element. And also Quint, the main guy in this, is definitely book boyfriend material. I loved seeing him throughout this. He is a sweetheart. I love how passionate he is about the animals and caring for the environment. And also there's some fun events in here that you get to experience them planning, which is something that I always enjoy in books. Next, I read the second book in the ACOTAR series, which is A Court of Mist and Fury, also by Sarah J. Maas, obviously. And this is probably my favorite book that I read this month. I have like a billion tabs in the side that marked all of my favorite quotes and my favorite moments, and I still keep going back to relive some of my favorite moments because I can't get enough of this. And I can't say too much, obviously, because of spoilers, even though I wish I could just go on and on about it. But I love Feyre and Rhys together. They are a power couple. It's just amazing. It's so passionate, and I can't get enough of reading about Rhys. He's probably my favorite book character ever. This book definitely played with my emotions. There are moments where I was crying. There's definitely moments that made me laugh and made me super happy. Any emotion you can think of, I probably felt it while reading this book. It was amazing. I literally had like a book hangover after reading this because I couldn't even think about picking up another book for days because it was just so good and it consumed my thoughts even after finishing it. But like I said, as you could tell, it's amazing. I am just so obsessed. I need to continue on the series. I have 2 more books to read. I don't have the newest one yet, but I really need to get on it because I loved all the characters we met in this, and I need to see more of Rhys and Feyre. After that, I read A Taste for Love by Jennifer Yen, and this follows an Asian American family, mostly the daughter Liza, and she kind of pushes back against the traditions and expectations that her mother has for her, especially because her mom keeps setting her up with all of these Asian guys that she thinks would be perfect for her daughter to be with. And one day, Liza agrees to help her mother with a baking competition that she puts on, but when she gets there, all of the contestants are hand-picked guys that are mom approved, and it definitely catches her off guard, and it's kind of like a whole bachelorette situation, so it's definitely a very interesting book. I feel like it would make a really great movie. The whole concept is amazing. It's definitely a perfect rom-com. This was definitely an adorable romance, a perfect book to read around Valentine's Day, which I did, but you could definitely read it anytime, obviously. But it definitely like warmed my heart. It was very sweet. It was a very interesting way to show like the expectations that Asian families kind of pass down through generations. I thought that was very interesting. I loved Liza's best friend, Grace. She was so fun to get to know, and also I thought it was great bi representation, so I really loved her. And one of my favorite parts of this book by far was all of the baking we got to see in it. It just made me want to get up and go bake some bread or bake a cake or something, but that was definitely very fun to kind of experience it throughout the whole book. I'm really loving food-themed romances, as you could probably tell. My next read was Starry Eyes by Jen Bennett, and this is kind of a best friends turned enemies story. We have Zori and Lennon, who used to be BFFs until something happened at the homecoming dance to make them stop talking to each other altogether and dislike each other. And they go on this group camping trip out in the woods, but somehow the 2 of them find themselves stranded in the wilderness, and in order to get back to civilization, they have to hash out what happened and work on their relationship and kind of start to rekindle what they had. And this was very adorable. I love the character names. I loved this really cute map in here, and I think there's 1 or 2 more throughout the book, but I thought that was a really fun element. Being out in the wilderness was definitely a very fun backdrop and setting for this relationship and the story. So that was really fun because there were a lot of things happening that they had to worry about that you typically wouldn't read about in most romances. So it definitely made for some interesting plot twists. And then also, I thought it was very interesting how Zori kind of has this fractured family background. So that was very interesting to learn about throughout the book as well. Next up was another Christina Lauren book called The Unhoneymooners. And this one follows Olivia, who's the maid of honor at her twin sister's wedding. But at the reception, everybody gets food poisoning except for Olivia and the best man, Ethan. And the two of them really don't get along, but because they're the only two people that are healthy, they have to go on the couple's honeymoon trip and basically pretend to be newlyweds. So you can imagine that doesn't really go the best. And I had really high expectations going into this one. I was really, really looking forward to it, but I was honestly a little disappointed just because enemies to lovers is by far my favorite trope, and this was kind of pitched as that, but it didn't really feel like an enemies to lovers. At first there was a little bit of banter, but the enemies part was basically one-sided, so I was kind of disappointed with that. I feel like there's a very quick transition between that and the part where they liked each other and were kind of nice to each other. So for me, it didn't hit very hard, but it's still a very good book. That was just more of a personal preference, I think. Also, there is a character in here that I really, really disliked for many reasons, and if you read it, you will understand who I'm talking about, but another character gets some revenge on that first character by the end of the book, which I think was amazing. That was one of my favorite moments, so definitely still worth the read. It just was different than I expected. Next, I read another ebook called It Only Happens in the Movies by Holly Bourne. And this follows Audrey, who is 100% over romance. Her parents have gotten a divorce. She just went through a breakup, and she ends up working at the local movie theater where she meets Harry, who keeps flirting with her, and no matter how hard she tries to resist him, she finds herself falling for him. I really loved that this book had a lot of interesting commentary on romance movies and how they set some high unrealistic expectations. I thought that was really fun to kind of read throughout this novel. Also, I feel like the romance in this one was pretty average for me because I was kind of rooting for Audrey and Harry, but there was something a little bit off for me. Also, Audrey's family has a lot of issues, which added a more raw, darker theme to the book, but it definitely caught me off guard, so be aware of that before you jump into this. But like I said, overall, this was pretty average for me, but it definitely had some very interesting commentary on romance movies, so if you're interested in that, you should still give this book a shot. After that, we have the only audiobook that I read this month, which is Her Royal Highness by Rachel Hawkins, and this is actually a companion novel to Prince Charming, which I have right there, but I really enjoyed this. It was one of my favorites from this month as well, and this follows Millie, who decides to go to this prestigious school in Scotland. So she moves all the way from Texas to Scotland, and it's everything that she's always wanted, except the only problem is that her roommate Flora is a literal princess, and they definitely don't get along. Also, this is a sapphic romance, and it's literally like the cutest sapphic romance I think I've ever read. I loved getting to know Flora and Millie and all these other characters and jumping back into this world again because I really enjoyed Prince Charming. So it's basically the same vibe, just with some different characters, which was really fun. And you do still see Seb, which you meet in Prince Charming. And I really hope that there's more books in this series. I would love for Seb or for some of the other characters to get their own book because I would love to see what happens to them. I really enjoyed the culture shock that Millie got in this book because I feel like it's very relatable. I would probably go through the exact same things if I ever try to go to school in Scotland or any other country. I feel like there would be a ton of things that I didn't know, and I would only hope that I have somebody as great as Sax, which is Millie's friend from the school, to kind of guide me the way that she guided Millie. The only thing that I would have wanted to be different in this book is that I wish there was an epilogue, because it ended in a very sweet way, and I feel like it could be considered like that story kind of wrapped up, but it would have been nice to kind of see just a little bit more of the characters, because I just couldn't get enough of them. Then I read Beach Read by Emily Henry, and this follows January, who is a romance author, and Augustus, who writes literary fiction, and they are by far polar opposites, but they find themselves in neighboring beach houses, and they both have writer's block. So one night they strike this deal that they will switch stories, and he will take her along whenever he does research, and she will show him all of the rom-com worthy moments and little places to go. And so they basically are just trying to do this to stop their writer's block and figure out who they are as authors, but they also kind of stumble across love along the way. My favorite part of the story by far were all of the layers that January and Gus had. There was hurt and anger mixed with yearning for love and answers, and just so much raw emotion that kind of caught me off guard, but in the best way possible. And I really enjoyed the whole concept of this book, with writers trading stories and kind of learning from each other, because I always love when a character in a story is a avid reader or is a writer, but this was definitely a spin on that and a very creative way to do that, and I loved experiencing what these two went through in this book. Like I said, this is a very cute romance. I loved getting to know the characters, and it also had its steamy moments, so that was a great element too, but I highly recommend this one. Up next, we have Read, Swoon, Repeat, which is by a bunch of various authors, because this was actually an arc basically, or a compilation of sneak peeks that I got from Penguin Teen on NetGalley, and basically this is a compilation of the first 3 or 4 chapters from 8 upcoming romance releases in 2021, and I am obsessed with this concept. I loved that you got to experience 8 different stories, and this is a good way to see which books I'm interested in and which ones I don't really need to think about again. But I definitely added at least 4 or 5 of these to my TBR and onto my Goodreads, so I'm very excited for a lot of these. For instance, my favorite ones that I can remember off the top of my head were Some Girls Do by Jennifer Dugan, I think, and then From Tokyo with Love. I hope that's what that one's called, but those are just a couple of the stories that I got to read, but I definitely am very excited for them to come out. I cannot wait, and if you can ever get your hands on a book like this that gives you little sneak peeks and tidbits of different things, I highly recommend it, because it definitely helped me figure out which ones were worth my time. After that, I read Catching Jordan by Miranda Keneally, and this follows Jordan, obviously, who is the quarterback on her high school football team. And one day this new guy transfers to the school, and it turns out that he is also a very talented quarterback. And so Jordan finds herself torn between being distracted by his good looks and his charm, and also being worried for keeping her position and trying to defend her spot, basically. And I really enjoyed this. I love football, so it was really fun to read a book that revolves around the sport, and I loved all of the little tidbits and all of the sports scenes that we get in this. But I also really enjoyed the relationship between Jordan and all of her teammates. They always had her back, and it was just such a fun dynamic, especially Henry. He's probably my favorite character. So I really loved his relationship with Jordan for sure. And another fun element of this was Jordan's dad being a player in the NFL. So he had different expectations and different feelings toward Jordan, and it was very interesting to see their relationship and their dynamic shift throughout the story. So that was another great element too. Up next, I have Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Bayron, and this is a Cinderella retelling where Cinderella really did exist over 200 years ago, and now every year all of the girls are forced to attend this ball where the men within society choose them, and if they are not chosen to get married, they are never heard from again. And our main character, Sophia, wants absolutely nothing to do with that, and she ends up fleeing from the ball, and she ends up in Cinderella's tomb, where she meets Constance, who is Cinderella's last living descendant. And together they decide that they're going to work together to take down the king and this whole system. This is also a sapphic romance, and it was really nice to see Sophia and Constance together. I really enjoyed their relationship, and it was just very sweet. I do kind of wish there was a little bit more build up with them, but like I said, it was still a very sweet romance, and I was definitely rooting for the two of them. And also, the whole retelling aspect of the story was by far my favorite part. It challenges everything you think you know about the Cinderella story, and it really is such a cool modern twist on a classic fairy tale that we all know and love. I also really enjoyed the way this ended because it was a good ending for the story if it is decided that this should be a standalone, but it's also the perfect setup for a sequel, so I'm really hoping that we will get more in this world with these characters. My next read is Well Met by Jen DeLuca, and I am so glad that I picked this one up. This is one of my favorites that I read this month, and I can't stop thinking about it. This is one of the most recent ones that I read, and this follows Emily, who kind of drops her life and moves in with her sister and her niece because her sister had just gotten in this accident. And her niece wants to do this Renaissance fair, and the only way she could do it is if Emily decides to join instead. So she kind of gets roped into that and ends up bumping into Simon, who runs the Renaissance fair, and it's actually his family's legacy. So he really doesn't approve of Emily's lighthearted attitude toward it all, and they definitely get off on the wrong foot. But while they're working the Renaissance fair, he is a pirate and she is a tavern wench, and he is very flirtatious toward her, and she's not really sure if what they're doing is real or just part of the characters that they're playing. This book just makes me want to experience a Renaissance fair. I've never read about anything like that or experienced anything like that in real life, but I really want to go now. And Simon and Emily are the best. I loved their relationship. I loved the swoon worthy romance. I love their banter and the sweetness, and that they really kind of help work through each other's past, and it's just so adorable, and Simon is definitely book boyfriend material. I also really loved all of the side characters. You get to meet a bunch of other people that work at this Renaissance fair, and they are just amazing. Stacy, I think his name is Mitch, and Chris are all some of my favorite characters, along with Emily's family, April and Caitlin. There is just such a great cast of characters, and their personalities are so different from each other, and they all stand out in their own way, and it just makes you want to be a part of their group. I really loved getting to know all of these characters. But like I said, I love enemies to lovers, and I really loved all of the banter and the playful flirtation that Simon and Emily had together. It was so fun to read, and I think there are more books in this series. I think they are probably companion novels though, and I'm pretty sure the second one is called Well Played, but I'm not sure. But I definitely need to get that one because I'm so excited to jump back into this world. And I think there's actually a third one. I can't think of what the name is right now, but I think it comes out later this year. So I think this was the perfect time for me to read this, and it's just amazing. This is one of the ones I highly recommend to you guys for sure. And last but not least, we have Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, which I have not finished yet, but I am going to finish it after filming this video, and since it'll still be February, I figured I would count it. But I'm sure you guys have all heard something about this book. I've seen it all over BookTube. It's definitely a very popular read, and I can see why. I'm really enjoying it so far, and I really think it's living up to the hype. Obviously, I can't fully say yet because I haven't finished it, but this is a male-male romance between the son of the President of the United States and an actual prince from across the pond, and the tabloids capture an altercation between the two, and that kind of makes U.S.-British relations take a turn for the worse. So they end up staging this truce between the two, and at first it's definitely fake, but they find themselves kind of hurtling toward a secret romance. But like I said, I haven't finished this one yet, so I haven't really composed all of my thoughts, but I'm really enjoying it, and I definitely can see why people love Casey McQuiston and also are in love with this book and this romance. Alright, so those are all 17 books that I read in the month of February. I'm still not quite sure how I read that many. I'm sure this video is way too long, so I'm very impressed if you made it this far. Thank you for the support. But please comment below what your favorite book that you read in February is. I would love some recommendations. And also, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. I would really, really appreciate it. And if you do subscribe, click the notification bell so you know when I upload next. But thank you guys so much for watching. I can't wait to see you in my next video.